I was the maid of honor at her wedding. I gave a speech about soulmates. 3 years later, I slept with her husband for the first time, in her bed, while she was visiting her mother 2 states away. We used her sheets, her pillows, her bathroom afterward to clean up the evidence of what we'd done. I'm not telling you this to shock you, though I know it's shocking. I'm telling you because you need to understand the depth of my betrayal before you can understand anything else about this story. I didn't just have an affair with my best friend's husband. I did it deliberately, methodically, over the course of 18 months. I dismantled her marriage piece by piece, and I made sure she never suspected a thing. Her name is Sophie Chen. We've been best friends since the 7th grade. 22 years of shared secrets, inside jokes, and the kind of intimacy that's supposed to be unbreakable. She was the first person I called when my father died. I was the first person she told when she got engaged. We were the constants in each other's lives, the fixed points around which everything else revolved. And I destroyed her. Have you ever done something so terrible that you couldn't even recognize yourself anymore? I'm not talking about small betrayals or white lies. I mean something that fundamentally changed who you are as a person, something that made you look in the mirror and see a stranger staring back. If you have, you might understand what I'm about to tell you. If you haven't, well, maybe this story will help you understand how easily a good person can become a monster. Tell me in the comments, have you ever crossed a line you never thought you'd cross? I need to know I'm not alone in this. My name is Eliza Morgan. I'm 34 years old. I'm a graphic designer at a mid-sized marketing firm. I volunteer at an animal shelter on weekends. I donate to charity, call my mother every Sunday, and always return my shopping cart to the designated area. I am also the woman who systematically seduced her best friend's husband and then watched in satisfied silence as their marriage collapsed. Sophie's divorce was finalized 6 months ago. She thinks it happened because she and David grew apart, because the spark died, because they wanted different things, because sometimes love just isn't enough. That's the narrative she's constructed, the story she tells herself to make sense of the wreckage. She has no idea that I'm the one who burned it all down. And here's the part that keeps me awake at night, the part that made me decide to finally write this confession. I don't feel guilty. I should. I know I should. Normal people feel guilty when they betray their closest friends, when they lie and manipulate and destroy. But when I think about what I did to Sophie's marriage, all I feel is a cold, quiet satisfaction. Because Sophie Chen is not who she pretends to be. And what I did to her, she deserved every moment of it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand why I destroyed my best friend's marriage, you need to understand our friendship. You need to see what everyone else saw, the perfect bond between two women who loved each other like sisters. Then you need to see what was underneath. I met Sophie in 7th grade when her family moved to our suburb from San Francisco. She was everything I wasn't. Confident, beautiful, effortlessly popular. She walked into our middle school like she owned it, and within a week, she basically did. The other girls wanted to be her. The boys wanted to date her. The teachers adored her. I was invisible. The kind of girl who sat in the back of the classroom, who ate lunch alone, who had learned to make herself small so the bullies would find easier targets. I had no friends, no social skills, no hope that anything would ever change. Then Sophie Chen sat next to me in English class. "I like your notebook," she said, pointing to the sketchbook where I drew instead of taking notes. "You're really talented." No one had ever said that to me before. No one had ever noticed me at all. "Thanks," I managed, my face burning. "I'm Sophie. Want to eat lunch together?" And just like that, my life changed. For the next 22 years, Sophie was the center of my universe. She pulled me out of my shell, introduced me to her friends, taught me how to dress and talk and exist in the world. She was my protector, my advocate, the person who made me feel like I mattered. At least, that's what I believed. Looking back now, I can see the patterns I was too grateful to notice at the time. The way Sophie always had to be the star of every story. The way she helped me by giving advice that kept me just insecure enough to need her. The way she collected friends like accessories, displaying them when useful and discarding them when they became inconvenient. But I didn't see any of that then. I just saw the girl who had saved me from loneliness, and I loved her with the desperate, unconditional love of someone who has never been chosen before. Sophie dated constantly throughout high school and college. Gorgeous boys, successful boys, boys who looked at her like she was made of light. I dated rarely, and only boys she had rejected first, her cast-offs, which she generously allowed me to have. I told myself I didn't mind. I told myself that Sophie's beauty and charisma were gifts, and that I was lucky to bask in their reflection. I told myself that some people were meant to shine and others were meant to support, and that there was honor in being the supporting player in someone else's story. I told myself a lot of lies. When Sophie met David Walsh at 26, I knew immediately that this one was different. He was handsome, yes, but more than that, he was kind. The kind of man who remembered details about people, who asked follow-up questions, who seemed genuinely interested in the answers. The first time we all hung out together, David spent 20 minutes asking about my work, my art, my dreams. Sophie had to physically pull him away, laughing about how he was always adopting strays. I remember the way that word landed. Stray. Like I was a lost animal he'd found interesting for a moment before returning to his real life. Sophie married David 2 years later. I stood beside her in a sage green dress, holding her bouquet, watching her promise to love and cherish this man forever. I gave a speech about soulmates, and I meant every word, because at that point, I still believed in Sophie. Still believed that our friendship was real, that her love for me was genuine, that the hierarchy between us was natural rather than constructed. It took 5 more years for me to see the truth, and when I finally saw it, everything changed. The shift began 3 years after Sophie's wedding. I had started dating someone, a man named Marcus, who worked in finance, who was successful and kind, and for once in my life seemed to genuinely want me, not as a consolation prize, not as a backup option, but as his first choice. For the first time, I felt like an equal in a relationship, like a person worthy of love, rather than a grateful recipient of whatever scraps were offered. Sophie hated him. She never said it directly. Sophie was too sophisticated for that. But the signs were unmistakable. The way she'd subtly criticize him during our conversations, the way she'd bring up his minor flaws and magnify them, the way she'd compare him unfavorably to David, to her ex-boyfriends, to an ideal that Marcus could never match. "I just want you to be happy," she'd say, her voice dripping with concern, "and I'm not sure he's the one who can give you that." When Marcus proposed, Sophie cried, not tears of joy, tears of what she later called overwhelming emotion, but which I recognized, finally, for what they really were: fear. Fear that I was about to have something she couldn't control. Fear that I might become an equal rather than a satellite. She convinced me not to accept. I still don't know exactly how she did it. Sophie has a gift for manipulation, for planting seeds of doubt so subtly that you think they're your own thoughts. Over the course of 3 months, she systematically dismantled my confidence in Marcus, in our relationship, in my own judgment. "You're so young," she said. "There's no rush. He travels so much for work. Is that really the life you want? I just think you deserve someone who makes you feel more, you know?" I broke off the engagement. Marcus was devastated. I was devastated. But Sophie was there to pick up the pieces, to comfort me, to assure me I'd made the right choice. "You're too special for him," she whispered, holding me while I cried. "You'll find someone worthy of you someday." I believed her. 6 months later, I found out from a mutual friend that Sophie had been telling people she'd saved me from a terrible mistake, that Marcus had been controlling and manipulative, that I'd been too naive to see it, that she'd had to intervene for my own good. None of it was true. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was learning what she'd said about me at her own wedding in a private moment she didn't know was overheard. One of David's cousins, a woman I'd never met, reached out to me on social media. She said she'd always felt guilty about something, and she needed to get it off her chest. At the reception, she'd been in a bathroom stall when Sophie came in with her sister. They hadn't known anyone was listening. "I can't believe Eliza actually thought she looked good in that dress," Sophie had said, laughing. "Did you see how she was hovering around David all night? It's pathetic, really. She's always been obsessed with my life. I think she wishes she was me." "Why do you even keep her around?" her sister had asked. "Because she's useful, and because she'd literally fall apart without me." It's kind of a power trip, honestly, knowing someone is that dependent on you. The cousin had sent me screenshots of the messages, asking if I wanted the full story. I said yes, and for the next hour, I learned exactly what my best friend thought of me, that I was pathetic, needy, a project she'd undertaken out of a combination of boredom and ego, that she kept me close because having someone worship you is addictive, and I was the most devoted worshiper she'd ever found. 22 years of friendship, 22 years of thinking I was loved, and it was all a performance. I didn't confront Sophie. I didn't cry or scream or demand an explanation. Instead, I did something much more calculated. I decided to take everything from her, piece by piece, so slowly she'd never see it coming. The marriage was the obvious target. Sophie's identity was built on being the perfect wife, the enviable partner, the woman who had it all. David was the crown jewel of her collection, proof of her superiority, her worthiness, her success. If I could destroy that, I would destroy her. But I needed to be careful. Sophie was smart, observant, always watching for threats to her carefully constructed world. Any direct approach would be detected immediately. I needed to be subtle, patient. I needed to play a game she didn't even know we were playing. So I studied. I watched Sophie and David together with new eyes, cataloging every interaction, every dynamic, every crack in their supposedly perfect marriage. And there were cracks. I could see that now that I was looking. The way Sophie talked over David at dinner parties, the way his eyes would go distant when she launched into another story about herself, the way they performed intimacy for audiences but rarely touched when they thought no one was watching. David was lonely. I could see it clearly now. He'd married the idea of Sophie, the beautiful, charming, perfect woman, and slowly discovered that the reality was something much colder. He was trapped in a marriage with someone who saw him as an accessory rather than a partner. He was vulnerable, and I was going to exploit that vulnerability. My approach was gradual, almost imperceptible. I started paying more attention to David when we all hung out together, asking about his work, remembering details from previous conversations, laughing at his jokes with genuine appreciation. I was warm where Sophie was critical, attentive where she was dismissive, present where she was perpetually distracted by her phone. I wasn't trying to seduce him, not yet. I was trying to become his friend, to establish myself as a safe space, someone who actually saw him and valued what he had to offer. It took months, slow, patient months of building trust, of positioning myself as the supportive friend who just happened to be around. Sophie never suspected anything. Why would she? I was good, reliable Eliza, the satellite who had orbited her for 2 decades. The idea that I might have my own agenda was literally unthinkable to her. By the end of the first year, David and I had developed our own friendship, independent of Sophie. We texted occasionally, met for coffee when Sophie was busy, talked about things he couldn't talk about with his wife, his doubts, his dreams, his growing sense that his marriage wasn't what he'd hoped it would be. I listened. I sympathized. I validated every concern, magnified every doubt, and slowly, carefully, I drove a wedge between him and the woman he'd married. "You deserve to be with someone who appreciates you," I told him one afternoon, echoing the exact words Sophie had used on me about Marcus. "Someone who sees how special you are." He looked at me with something I recognized: hope. And I knew the next phase could begin. The first time David kissed me, I felt nothing. No spark, no passion, no overwhelming desire. Just cold, calculated satisfaction. We were at a bar, one of our friend dates that Sophie knew about but didn't care enough to question. David had been drinking, talking about how unhappy he was, how he felt invisible in his own marriage, how he sometimes wondered if he'd made a terrible mistake. "You're not invisible to me," I said softly. "I see you, David. I've always seen you." He looked at me for a long moment, something shifting behind his eyes. Then he leaned across the table and kissed me. I let it happen, let him think he was the one making the move, taking the risk, breaking the rules. That was important. He needed to feel like the pursuer, like this was his choice rather than my design. "We shouldn't have done that," he said afterward, pulling back. "I'm sorry, I don't know what came over me." "It's okay." I touched his hand. "I understand, and I won't say anything. This can just be ours." That was the beginning. Over the next 6 months, our relationship escalated from stolen kisses to secret meetings to full-blown physical affair. We were careful, always meeting in places Sophie would never go, always covering our tracks, always maintaining the fiction of innocent friendship when we were in public. I became expert at deception, at looking Sophie in the eye while knowing I'd been in her husband's arms the night before, at comforting her when she complained about feeling disconnected from David, while knowing exactly why that disconnection existed. I was the perfect double agent, the best friend who was always there, always supportive, always ready to listen, while systematically dismantling everything she thought she had. And here's the thing that surprises me still. I never felt guilty. Not once. Not when I slept with David in their marital bed, not when Sophie confided in me about her fears that her marriage was failing, not when she cried on my shoulder about feeling like she was losing her husband. Maybe I should have felt something, some flicker of conscience, some moment of doubt about whether what I was doing was right. But every time that thought surfaced, I remembered the bathroom conversation. I remembered her calling me pathetic. I remembered 22 years of thinking I was loved while actually being used. The guilt never came, only satisfaction. At this point, I was deep into destroying my best friend's marriage. I had engineered an affair with her husband, and I felt no remorse about it. I need to ask you something. Do you think I was justified? Do you think the betrayal I'd experienced, the years of manipulation, the cruel words behind my back, the destruction of my engagement made what I did understandable? Or was I just as bad as Sophie? Maybe worse. Type "justified" or "worse" in the comments and tell me your reasoning. I'm genuinely asking because even now, I'm not entirely sure of the answer. I had planned for David to confess. That was always the endgame. Not a messy public revelation, but a quiet, devastating admission that would shatter Sophie's world. I wanted David to be the one to tell her, to watch her face as she realized that the perfect husband she'd collected had fallen in love with someone else, with her best friend, with the pathetic girl she'd kept around as a pet. But things didn't go according to plan. Because David, as it turned out, wasn't just an affair. He wasn't just a weapon I was using against Sophie. Somewhere in those 18 months of secret meetings and whispered conversations and carefully manufactured intimacy, something had shifted. David had fallen in love with me, real love, not the game I was playing, not the transaction I designed, but genuine, vulnerable, terrifying love. He started talking about leaving Sophie, about building a future together, about finally being with someone who truly understood him. This wasn't part of the plan. I had expected the affair to destroy Sophie's marriage. I had expected David to confess and Sophie to divorce him, and both of them to suffer the consequences of what had happened. But I hadn't expected David to want an actual relationship. I hadn't expected him to look at me like I was his salvation rather than his mistake. I certainly hadn't expected to feel anything in return. Because here's the secret I didn't want to admit, even to myself. Somewhere along the way, the performance had become real. The conversations I'd manufactured to build trust had become genuine connection. The attention I'd paid to make him feel seen had made me actually see him. The intimacy I'd faked had somehow transformed into intimacy I felt. I was falling for David, and I didn't know what to do with that. The affair continued, but the dynamic shifted. We weren't just sneaking around anymore. We were building something, planning something. David became increasingly bold about his intentions, talking openly about divorce, about confronting Sophie, about starting a new life together. "I can't keep living this lie," he told me one night, lying in a hotel bed we'd started renting by the month. "Sophie and I are basically roommates at this point. She doesn't care about me. She never really did." "What about the fallout?" I asked, genuinely curious now. "The divorce, the splitting of assets, the social consequences." "None of it matters." He turned to face me. "I'd rather have a real life with you than a fake life with her." I didn't know how to respond, because the person I'd been 18 months ago, the cold, calculating woman who'd set out to destroy her best friend, that person would have been triumphant. The plan was working. Sophie was about to lose everything. But the person I was becoming, the woman who had accidentally fallen in love with her weapon, that person was terrified. Because if David left Sophie for me, I would have to face what I'd done, not just to Sophie, but to myself. I would have to live with the knowledge that my relationship was built on manipulation, that our love story was actually a revenge story, that nothing about us was as pure as David believed. I would have to decide whether to tell him the truth, or whether to bury it forever. Or whether to bury it forever. Sophie found out on a Tuesday, not because David confessed, and not because I slipped up. She found out because she went through David's phone while he was in the shower, something she'd apparently done periodically throughout their marriage, though she'd never admitted it to me. The text she found was innocuous by itself. "Can't wait to see you tonight. Same place." But it was enough. Sophie was smart enough to put the pieces together. The late nights, the emotional distance, the way her husband had gradually pulled away from her over the past year and a half. She confronted David that evening, and he, exhausted from the double life, relieved to finally stop lying, told her everything. Almost everything. He didn't tell her it was me. I learned this the next morning when Sophie showed up at my apartment, mascara streaked down her face, looking like her entire world had collapsed. "He's been having an affair," she sobbed, falling into my arms. "For over a year. He won't tell me who she is, but I know there's someone else." The irony wasn't lost on me. Here was Sophie, the woman who had manipulated me for decades, who had mocked me behind my back, who had destroyed my engagement out of jealousy, crying on my shoulder about her husband's betrayal. And she had no idea that the shoulder she was crying on belonged to the other woman. I held her while she cried. I made sympathetic noises. I said all the things a best friend was supposed to say. And underneath it all, I felt a savage, vicious joy. This was what I'd wanted. This was the moment I'd been working toward for 18 months. Sophie Chen, humiliated. Sophie Chen, abandoned. Sophie Chen finally understanding what it felt like to have someone she trusted destroy her. "I don't know what I did wrong," she kept saying. "I thought we were happy. I thought we had something special." "You never had anything special," I wanted to say. "You had a trophy husband you displayed at parties and ignored the rest of the time. You had a marriage built on your own vanity rather than actual love. You got exactly what you deserved." But I didn't say any of that. Instead, I said, "This isn't your fault, Sophie. Sometimes people just fail us." She looked up at me, eyes red and swollen, and for a moment I saw something I hadn't expected. Vulnerability. Real vulnerability, not the performed kind. "You're the only person I can trust," she whispered. "You've always been there for me, Eliza. I don't know what I'd do without you." Something twisted in my chest. Not guilt. Not exactly, but something. David wanted me to come forward. Now that the affair was exposed, he argued there was no point in hiding anymore. He was going to divorce Sophie anyway. I could finally be acknowledged as the woman he loved. We could stop sneaking around and start building the life we talked about. "She'll find out eventually," he said during one of our calls. "Better it comes from us than from someone else." "She's my best friend, David. This will destroy her." "She destroyed herself." His voice was hard. "You've told me what she's really like, the manipulation, the cruelty, the way she's treated you for years. She doesn't deserve your protection." He was right. I knew he was right. Sophie had spent 2 decades using me, belittling me, keeping me small enough to serve her needs. She had sabotaged my engagement, mocked me to her sister, and treated my devotion as a power trip. She didn't deserve my protection. And yet, something had changed since that morning on my couch, since I'd held Sophie while she cried and heard her say I was the only person she trusted, since I'd seen, beneath all the armor and manipulation, a human being who was genuinely suffering. I had wanted her to suffer. That had been the entire point. But watching it happen felt different than I'd expected. "I need more time," I told David. "Just give me a few more days to figure out how to handle this." Those few days turned into weeks. The divorce proceedings began. Sophie leaned on me more heavily than ever, treating me as her primary support through the dissolution of her marriage. She still didn't know who the other woman was, and David, at my request, kept my identity secret. I was living a double life more exhausting than anything that had come before. During the day, I was Sophie's devoted best friend, helping her navigate divorce lawyers and asset divisions and the social fallout of her failing marriage. At night, I was David's partner, planning our future, building the relationship that had started as a weapon and become something real. The cognitive dissonance was crushing. I started having trouble sleeping, eating, concentrating at work. The stress of maintaining 2 incompatible identities was wearing me down, and I knew something had to give. But every time I resolved to tell Sophie the truth, I would remember why I'd done this in the first place. The bathroom conversation, the engagement she'd destroyed, the 22 years of believing I was loved when I was actually being used. She deserved this, didn't she? The night everything changed, I was at Sophie's apartment. She'd asked me to come over, said she needed to talk about something important, that she'd discovered some things that changed everything. I assumed she meant something about the divorce proceedings, about David, about whatever new revelation had emerged from their lawyers. I wasn't prepared for what actually happened. When I arrived, Sophie was sitting in her living room, calm in a way I hadn't seen since the affair was revealed. Too calm, the kind of calm that precedes a storm. "Close the door," she said, "and sit down." I sat. "I've been doing some thinking," she said slowly, "about my marriage, about you." Something in her tone made my blood run cold. I always wondered, how David's affair partner could stay hidden for so long, how she could be sophisticated enough to maintain a secret relationship for 18 months without ever slipping up. Sophie's eyes met mine. It would have to be someone smart, someone careful, someone who already had regular access to my husband, who already had a reason to be in our lives. "Sophie, it's you." Her voice didn't waver. "You're the other woman. You've been sleeping with my husband for a year and a half, and you've been lying to my face about it every single day." I couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't do anything but sit there, frozen, while Sophie calmly dismantled everything I thought I'd hidden. "David didn't tell me," she continued. "He's still protecting you, even now. Pathetic, really. But I'm not an idiot, Eliza. Once I started looking at our friendship, really looking, all the pieces fell into place. The way you inserted yourself into my marriage, the way David started pulling away right around the time you two started having your little coffee dates, the way you've been playing the supportive best friend while actually stabbing me in the back. How long have you known?" 3 weeks. I wanted to be sure before I confronted you. Sophie's smile was razor sharp. And I wanted to understand something. Why? What could I possibly have done to deserve this kind of betrayal from my oldest friend? The laugh that escaped me was bitter, involuntary. "What did you do?" I shook my head. "You really don't know? Enlighten me." So I did. I told her everything. The bathroom conversation at her wedding, the things she'd said about me to her sister, the way she'd sabotaged my engagement to Marcus, the 22 years of manipulation and condescension and keeping me small enough to serve her needs. I told her that I knew exactly what she thought of me, that I'd seen the real Sophie hiding behind the mask of friendship, that I had destroyed her marriage deliberately, methodically, as revenge for everything she'd done. When I finished, the silence stretched between us like a wire about to snap. Then Sophie said something that shattered everything I thought I knew. "I never said any of that at my wedding." I stared at her. "That cousin who reached out to you, Rachel, right? She's not David's cousin. She's actually his ex-girlfriend. They dated for 2 years before he met me." Sophie's voice was eerily calm. "She's been trying to destroy my marriage since the day we got engaged. Apparently, she decided that manipulating you was the easiest way to do it." That can't be true. Did you ever verify her story? Did you ever ask me directly? Or did you just believe a stranger on the internet because it confirmed what you already wanted to think? I opened my mouth to respond, but nothing came out. "The Marcus thing, yes, I had concerns about your engagement, but I never manipulated you into ending it. You made that choice yourself. Maybe I was more honest than I should have been about my doubts, but I was trying to protect you. I've always been trying to protect you." "But she said you called me pathetic, that you kept me around because it was a power trip." "Eliza," Sophie's voice cracked for the first time. "You're my best friend. You've been my best friend for 22 years. I've never thought of you as pathetic. I've never used you. I loved you." She was crying now, real tears, nothing performed about them. "And you destroyed my marriage because a stranger on the internet told you I was secretly a monster?" The ground beneath me dissolved. Everything I'd done, everything I'd justified, everything I'd told myself about who Sophie really was and what she deserved, all of it built on a lie I'd never bothered to verify. It's been 6 months since that night at Sophie's apartment. I've spent most of that time trying to piece together what really happened, who Rachel was, why she targeted me, how she knew exactly which buttons to push to turn me into her weapon. Here's what I've learned. Rachel Morrison dated David for 2 years before he met Sophie. She was convinced they were going to get married, had already started planning the wedding in her head when David broke things off. He'd realized they wanted different things, that the relationship wasn't working, that staying together would be a mistake for both of them. She never forgave him. When David got engaged to Sophie, Rachel became obsessed. She stalked their social media, kept track of their relationship milestones, and waited for an opportunity to destroy what she couldn't have. When she discovered my existence, Sophie's best friend, the devoted satellite who would do anything for her, she saw her chance. The messages she sent me were carefully crafted. The overheard conversation was entirely fabricated. The claims about Sophie's manipulation were designed specifically to exploit insecurities I didn't even know I had. Rachel had studied me. She knew about my history with Sophie, my tendency towards self-doubt, my desperate need to believe I was valued. She knew exactly how to plant seeds of paranoia that would grow into something monstrous. And I let her. I believed every word without question because some part of me wanted to believe it. Because being a victim was easier than accepting that my friendship with Sophie was complicated but real. Because righteous anger felt better than the uncomfortable truth that I'd always been a little jealous of her. Rachel didn't destroy Sophie's marriage. I did. I was the weapon she used, but I was the one who pulled the trigger. Sophie and I don't speak anymore. I've tried reaching out, apologizing, explaining, begging for a chance to make things right, but she doesn't respond. I don't blame her. How do you forgive someone who systematically dismantled your marriage based on lies they never bothered to verify? David and I are still together, technically, but something has changed between us. He knows now that our relationship started as a revenge plot, that I pursued him not because I loved him, but because I wanted to hurt Sophie. He says he understands that what we have now is real regardless of how it started, but I can see the doubt in his eyes. The question he'll never quite be able to shake: is she capable of doing this again? I don't know the answer. I'd like to say that I've learned from this, that the experience transformed me, made me a better person, taught me valuable lessons about trust and verification and the danger of letting grievances fester into something poisonous. But the truth is more complicated. I still feel the anger sometimes. The years of being Sophie's sidekick, of existing in her shadow, of never quite feeling good enough, that wasn't fabricated. That was real. The fact that Rachel exploited it doesn't mean it didn't exist. I was manipulated into destroying an innocent woman's marriage, but I was vulnerable to that manipulation because there was something broken inside me, something hungry and resentful that had been waiting for permission to strike. That's the part one don't know how to fix. Sophie still doesn't know the full truth. She knows I betrayed her, knows I slept with David, knows our friendship is over. But she doesn't know about Rachel. She doesn't know that I was manipulated too, that I'm also a victim in this twisted story. I've thought about telling her. Maybe it would help, knowing that someone else was pulling strings, that the betrayal wasn't entirely my own design. Maybe it would make forgiveness possible. But I don't think I deserve that. I made choices, horrible choices, based on evidence I never verified, targeting a friend who loved me. The fact that I was manipulated doesn't erase my responsibility. It doesn't change the damage I caused. Some mistakes can't be forgiven. Some betrayals are too complete. I destroyed my best friend's marriage, and she knows exactly what I did. The only secret left is why. And maybe that's the punishment I deserve, carrying the full weight of her hatred, knowing that she thinks I'm simply a monster, knowing I can't explain that I was also a victim without sounding like I'm making excuses. Maybe this is my penance, living with the knowledge of what I did and what was done to me, and the impossible space between the two. So that's my confession. The whole ugly truth about how I destroyed my best friend's marriage and why everything I believed about her was based on lies I never bothered to verify. I need to hear from you. Have you ever acted on something you believed to be true, only to discover later that you'd been manipulated? Have you ever let resentment build into something destructive and only realized after the damage was done that the resentment itself was based on false information? And here's the question I can't stop asking myself. Am I a victim or a villain? I was manipulated by someone who studied my insecurities and exploited them perfectly. But I also made the choice to pursue David, to maintain the affair, to watch Sophie suffer without ever questioning whether my anger was justified. Type victim or villain in the comments, or tell me I'm both, because that's what I suspect is true. Tell me about your own experiences with manipulation, with misplaced trust, with the terrifying realization that you were wrong about something you were absolutely certain of. I'll read every comment, and maybe, somewhere in all those responses, I'll find something that helps me understand how a good person can do something unforgivable, and whether there's any way back from that. Because right now, I have no idea. All I know is this: Sophie Chen was never the monster I believed her to be. The only monster in this story was me, and I'm going to have to live with that for the rest of my life.